Welcome, dear listeners, to another peaceful Christmas story for sleep. Tonight, we're traveling together to the snow-covered hills of Vermont, where the air is crisp and clean, scented with pine and wood smoke. Picture yourself settling into the most comfortable chair by a crackling fireplace, wrapped in a soft blanket, as I tell you the tale of Charlotte and her unexpected Christmas inheritance. This is a story of second chances and new beginnings, of finding love in the most unexpected places, and discovering that sometimes what we inherit is so much more valuable than what we thought we wanted. It's a story filled with twinkling Christmas lights, the gentle sound of snow falling on pine boughs, and the warm embrace of a community that knows the true meaning of Christmas magic. So close your eyes, take a deep breath, and let yourself drift into this enchanting world where Christmas trees grow in. Perfect rows, where hot chocolate warms both hands and hearts, and where love blooms as surely as spring follows winter. Our story begins on a snowy December evening, when a successful marketing executive from Manhattan is about to discover that the most precious gifts often come disguised as complications. Chapter 1: Arrival and First Impressions. The rental car's GPS had been telling Charlotte Winters she was arriving at her destination for the past 10 minutes, but all she could see through the swirling snow were endless pine trees and a winding dirt road that seemed to lead nowhere. She gripped the steering wheel tighter, her manicured nails a stark contrast against the black leather as she navigated another curve. "This can't be right," she muttered, squinting through the windshield. The late afternoon December sun was already setting behind the Vermont mountains, casting long purple shadows across the snow-covered landscape. She'd left Manhattan at dawn, trading her corner office view of skyscrapers for what was apparently the middle of nowhere. Then she saw it, a weathered wooden sign barely visible through the pine boughs. Evergreen Acres Christmas Tree Farm, East E. 1952. The Winters family, her grandmother's legacy, and now apparently her inheritance. Charlotte pulled into a gravel driveway that had seen better days, her designer heels clicking against the car's floor mat as she shifted into park. The farmhouse that emerged from behind a cluster of snow-laden firs looked like something from a Christmas card. White clapboard siding, green shutters, and a wraparound porch decorated with garland and twinkling lights. Smoke curled from the chimney, and warm yellow light spilled from the windows into the gathering dusk. She'd expected the place to be empty, locked up, and waiting for her to assess its value. The law firm had said something about a caretaker, but she'd imagined an elderly groundskeeper, not the scene of obvious habitation before her. Charlotte grabbed her leather briefcase and stepped out of the car, immediately regretting her choice of footwear as her heels sank into the snow. The cold Vermont air hit her like a slap after the controlled climate of her city life, and she pulled her wool coat tighter around her frame. The scent of pine and wood smoke filled her nostrils, so different from the exhaust and concrete smells of Manhattan. She was halfway to the porch when she heard it, the distinctive whir of a chainsaw, followed by a crash and a man's voice calling out instructions. The sounds were coming from somewhere beyond the farmhouse, deeper into the property, where rows upon rows of Christmas trees stretched as far as she could see in the dim light. "Hello?" she called out, but her voice was lost in the wind that rustled through the pine boughs. She made her way around the side of the house, following a path that had been recently shoveled, her heels slipping on the patches of ice despite her careful steps. That's when she saw him. A man in his early 30s was wrestling with what appeared to be an enormous Fraser fir that had toppled onto its side. He wore a red and black flannel shirt under a thick work coat, jeans that looked like they'd seen actual labor, and boots that belonged on a farm rather than a fashion runway. His dark hair was dusted with snow, and even from a distance she could see the concentration on his face as he worked to right the fallen tree. "Excuse me?" Charlotte called out louder this time. The man looked up, startled, and in that moment of distraction, the tree he'd been balancing shifted. Charlotte watched in horror as 8 feet of Fraser fir toppled directly toward him. Without thinking, She kicked off her heels and ran through the snow in her stockings, reaching him just as he dove to the side. They collided in a tangle of limbs and pine needles, tumbling into a snowbank with Charlotte landing squarely on top of him. For a moment, neither of them moved. Charlotte found herself staring down into the most striking pair of green eyes she'd ever seen, flecked with gold and framed by dark lashes dusted with snow. His face was angular but kind, with a slight weathering that spoke of a life spent outdoors. She became acutely aware of how close they were, how solid and warm he felt beneath her, how his hands had instinctively moved to steady her waist. "Are you hurt?" he asked, his voice deep and concerned. There was a slight accent there, not quite southern, but definitely not northern, something warmer than she was used to hearing. "I'm fine," she managed, though she wasn't entirely sure that was true. Her heart was racing, and not just from the adrenaline of the near accident. "Are you? I'll live." A smile tugged at the corner of his mouth. "Though I have to ask, who runs through snow in their stockings to save a stranger from a Christmas tree?" Charlotte suddenly became aware of their position and scrambled to get up, accepting his offered hand to pull her to her feet. Her stockings were soaked through and torn, her coat was covered in pine needles, and she was pretty sure there was snow in her hair. "I'm Charlotte," she said, brushing herself off and trying to regain some semblance of dignity. "Charlotte Winters." The change in his expression was immediate. The easy smile faded, replaced by something she couldn't quite read, surprise, maybe disappointment. He took a step back, and she felt an unexpected pang at the loss of warmth. "Winters," he repeated slowly, "as in Rose Winters. She was my grandmother." Charlotte's voice softened. "I'm here about the inheritance." The man, who still hadn't introduced himself, nodded slowly. He was looking at her now with new eyes, taking in her expensive coat, her city clothes, her complete lack of appropriate footwear for a Vermont winter. "I see." He bent to retrieve his work gloves from the snow. "I'm Jack Shepherd. I've been running the farm for the past 3 years." Charlotte felt a flutter of recognition. The lawyer had mentioned a Jack Shepherd, said he'd been invaluable to her grandmother's operation. What he hadn't mentioned was that Jack Shepherd looked like he'd stepped out of a winter romance novel, complete with flannel and an accent that made her name sound like music. "Mr. Shepherd," she said, shifting into her professional mode. It was easier to be Charlotte Winters, marketing director, than Charlotte Winters, woman who'd just tumbled into a snowbank with the most attractive man she'd met in years. "I believe my grandmother's attorney mentioned you. I'm here to assess the property." Something flickered across his face, hurt maybe, or resignation. "Of course you are." The words hung between them in the cold air, loaded with meaning she didn't understand. Around them, the Christmas tree farm stretched in neat rows, thousands of trees in various stages of growth. Even in the gathering darkness, she could see the care that had gone into maintaining the place. The trees were perfectly spaced, the paths between rows clear and well-marked. This wasn't just a farm, it was someone's passion project. "I suppose you'll want to see the books," Jack said, his tone carefully neutral now. "Get a sense of what you're inheriting." "That would be helpful, yes." Charlotte was trying to ignore how the warmth had gone out of his voice, how the easy friendliness from before had been replaced by polite professionalism. "I have a flight back to New York on Sunday. I'm hoping to get everything sorted by then." "Sunday?" Jack nodded, but she could see him doing the mental calculation. "That's 3 days. It should be enough time to get an appraisal and contact some realtors." The words felt wrong coming out of her mouth, but this was why she was here. Her life was in Manhattan. Her career, her apartment, her carefully constructed world of deadlines and board meetings, and success measured in quarterly reports. Jack's jaw tightened almost imperceptibly. "Right. Well, let me get this tree situated, and then I'll show you around." He turned back to the fallen Fraser fir, and Charlotte was struck by the set of his shoulders, the way he moved with easy competence around the farm equipment. This was a man in his element, and she was very clearly not in hers. "Jack," she called out as he hefted one end of the tree, "why did my grandmother never mention you?" He paused, glancing back at her. "Maybe she did, maybe you weren't listening." The words stung because they held a grain of truth. Charlotte had been so busy building her career, climbing the corporate ladder, that her visits to Vermont had become increasingly rare. Phone calls had been brief, focused on her grandmother's health rather than her life. When had she stopped asking about the farm, about the people who mattered to Rose Winters? "I should get my shoes," Charlotte said quietly. "Probably a good idea," Jack agreed, but his tone had softened slightly. "And maybe some boots while you're at it. You'll need them if you want to see the whole property." As Charlotte made her way back to the car, her feet numb with cold, she found herself glancing back at Jack. He was working with practiced efficiency, as if 8-foot Christmas trees regularly toppled over and had to be righted. She wondered how many other crises he'd handled in the 3 years he'd been running the farm, how many problems he'd solved that her grandmother had never bothered to mention. The farmhouse was warm and inviting when she pushed through the front door, her stocking feet silent on the hardwood floors. The interior was exactly as she remembered from childhood visits. Braided rugs, comfortable furniture that invited you to curl up with a book, and the lingering scent of her grandmother's apple cinnamon candles. But there were additions she didn't remember. A laptop computer on the kitchen table, surrounded by neat stacks of paperwork. A coffee mug in the sink that still held the dregs of the day's brew. Men's work boots by the door, caked with mud and snow. Jack Shepherd wasn't just running the farm. He was living here. Charlotte sank into one of the kitchen chairs, suddenly exhausted. She'd driven 8 hours to tie up loose ends, to sell off a property she had no use for, and get back to her real life. It was supposed to be simple, straightforward, businesslike. She hadn't expected Jack Shepherd. Through the kitchen window, she could see him in the distance, moving between the trees with a familiarity that spoke of years of care. He belonged here in a way she never had, never could. The farm was his home, his livelihood, his passion, and she was about to take it all away. Chapter 2. Getting to Know You. Charlotte woke to the sound of voices drifting up from the kitchen below. For a moment, she was disoriented. The bedroom was hers from childhood visits, but everything else felt foreign. Sunlight streamed through the gingham curtains, illuminating dust motes that danced in the air. She'd fallen asleep in her clothes after Jack had given her a brief tour the night before, too tired to do more than brush her teeth and collapse onto the familiar quilt. She checked her phone, 6:47 a.m. The voices below were growing louder, and she caught fragments of conversation, something about delivery schedules and tree sizes. Clearly, Jack was an early riser, and he wasn't alone. After a quick shower and a change into more appropriate attire, jeans and a cashmere sweater that would have to do until she could find suitable winter wear, Charlotte made her way downstairs. The kitchen was full of people, and the scent of fresh coffee and bacon. Jack stood at the stove, flipping pancakes with the ease of someone comfortable in the space. He wore another flannel shirt, this one green and blue, and jeans that looked like they'd been broken in through actual use rather than purchased that way. 2 other men sat at the kitchen table, both clearly farm workers based on their clothes and the easy way they spoke about tree varieties and cutting schedules. "Morning," Jack said without turning around, somehow sensing her presence. "Coffee's fresh. Thank you." Charlotte moved to the coffee pot, hyper-aware of the way the conversation at the table had paused. She could feel 3 pairs of eyes watching her as she poured coffee into a mug that read, "Sol Salwad's best grandma," one of her grandmother's favorites. "Charlotte, these are my guys," Jack said, sliding a stack of pancakes onto a plate. "Tom and Pete. They've been working the farm for 5 years. Tom was older, maybe early 50s, with graying hair and kind eyes. Pete looked to be about her age, with an easy smile and calloused hands wrapped around his coffee mug. Both men nodded politely, but she could sense their uncertainty. They knew why she was here. "Nice to meet you," Charlotte said, settling into an empty chair. "I hope I'm not interrupting anything important." "I'm just going over today's schedule," Pete said. "We've got 3 families coming this morning for their trees, and the Hendersons ordered a 12-footer for their front lawn." "The Hendersons?" Charlotte asked. "They run the hardware store in town," Jack explained, setting the plate of pancakes in the center of the table. "They order a tree every year for the store's display. Creates a nice centerpiece for their Christmas promotions." Tom nodded. Rose always gave them a good deal. said it was important to support local businesses. There was something in the way he said Rose's name. Not formal, like Mrs. Winters, but warm and familiar. These men hadn't just worked for her grandmother, they'd cared about her. "How long did you know her?" Charlotte asked. 15 years for me, Tom said. "She hired me right after my wife died. Needed the work, and she needed someone who understood trees." "Rose was good people," Pete added. "Always made sure we had steady work. Good pay. Treated us like family." Charlotte felt a familiar pang of guilt. While she'd been building her career in Manhattan, her grandmother had been building relationships here, creating a family of choice with the people who shared her passion for the farm. "She was," Charlotte agreed quietly. "I just wish I'd spent more time getting to know this side of her life." Jack glanced at her, and she caught something that looked like understanding in his expression. "She talked about you all the time. How proud she was of your success, your career. But she never told me about any of you," Charlotte said. "Not really. I mean, she mentioned the farm, but I thought it was just, I don't know, a hobby. Something to keep her busy in retirement." Tom and Pete exchanged a look, and Charlotte realized she'd said the wrong thing. "The farm's been in your family for 70 years, Jack said carefully. "It's not a hobby. It's a legacy." The word hung in the air between them, heavy with implication. Charlotte took a sip of her coffee, buying time to think. She'd expected numbers, profit margins, property values. She hadn't expected people whose livelihoods depended on her decision. "I'm sorry," she said finally. "I didn't mean to minimize what you've all built here. I can see this place matters to you. It should matter to you too," Pete said, his voice gentle but firm. "This is your heritage." Jack shot him a warning look, but Pete continued. "Your great-grandfather started this farm. Your grandmother spent 40 years building it up. And now it's yours to carry forward, or not," Tom added quietly, and Charlotte heard the resignation in his voice. The kitchen fell silent, except for the tick of the old grandfather clock in the corner and the whistle of wind through the pines outside. Charlotte looked around the table at these three men who'd clearly loved her grandmother, who'd built their lives around this place, and felt the weight of responsibility settling on her shoulders like a heavy blanket. "Tell me about the farm," she said finally. "Really tell me. I want to understand what I'm inheriting." Jack's expression softened slightly. "We'll show you, but first, eat something. It's going to be a long day." The pancakes were better than anything she'd had at the trendy brunch spots in Manhattan. Light and fluffy, with real maple syrup that Tom proudly explained came from trees on the property. As they ate, the conversation gradually shifted from uncomfortable silence to easy discussion of the day's plans. "We'll start with the retail area," Jack explained, "then walk through the growing fields so you can see the different varieties and age groups. The business side is pretty straightforward. We sell direct to families during the season, wholesale to retailers, and we've got a small mail-order business for wreaths and arrangements." "How many trees do you sell annually?" Charlotte asked, shifting into her professional mode. "Last year was our best, about 2,000 trees," Pete said. "Could be more if we had better marketing." Jack gave him a sharp look. "We do fine with word of mouth, sure, but Rose always said we could reach more people if we had someone who understood advertising," Tom added. "Someone who knew how to use the internet properly." Charlotte felt their eyes on her and realized they were making a case for her involvement. The irony wasn't lost on her. She was one of Manhattan's most sought-after marketing directors, and here was a business that could benefit from exactly her expertise. "What's your profit margin?" she asked. Jack's jaw tightened. "We're not getting rich, if that's what you're asking, but we're sustainable. The farm supports itself and provides decent wages. I wasn't implying—" "Yes, you were." Jack stood and began clearing plates. "You're wondering if it's worth your time, whether you should just sell to some developer who'll turn it into condos." The accusation stung because it hit too close to home. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Jack turned to face her, and she saw anger flashing in his green eyes. "You drove up here in your fancy car, with your designer clothes and your 3-day timeline. You called the farm a hobby. What exactly am I supposed to think?" Tom and Pete had gone very still, clearly uncomfortable with the tension crackling between Jack and Charlotte. She felt heat rise in her cheeks, part embarrassment, part anger at being called out so directly. "You don't know anything about me," she said, standing to face him. "You don't know what I've sacrificed to build my career, what I've worked for. And you don't know what this place means to the people who've poured their lives into it." Jack shot back. "But you're ready to sell it anyway." "I never said I was selling." "You didn't have to." They stood facing each other across the kitchen, the air charged with conflict and something else, something that made Charlotte's pulse quicken and her breath catch. She was used to boardroom confrontations, to defending her position with facts and figures, but this felt personal in a way that caught her off guard. "Jack," Tom said quietly, "maybe we should let Charlotte see the farm before we assume anything." Jack's expression shifted, and Charlotte saw him make a visible effort to rein in his anger. "You're right. I'm sorry, Charlotte. That was out of line, was it?" she asked. "Because maybe I needed to hear it." They looked at each other for a long moment, and Charlotte felt something shift between them. The anger was still there, but underneath it was something else. A mutual recognition that this conversation mattered more than either of them wanted to admit. "Come on," Jack said finally. "Let me show you what your grandmother built." The next few hours passed in a blur of pine trees and family stories. Jack walked her through row after row of Fraser firs, Douglas firs, and noble firs, explaining the growing cycles, the careful pruning that shaped each tree, the years of patience required to bring a tree from seedling to harvest. They visited the retail area where families were already arriving to select their Christmas trees. Charlotte watched Jack interact with customers, patient with the children who wanted to see every tree, helpful with parents trying to figure out what size would fit in their living rooms, knowledgeable about the care and feeding of fresh Christmas trees. She met the Henderson family, who ran the hardware store, and listened as they talked about Rose Winters like she'd been a cornerstone of the community. She heard stories about her grandmother's legendary Christmas cookies, her willingness to donate trees to families who couldn't afford them, her annual Christmas Eve party that brought together half the town. "She'd be proud of what you've done with the place," Mrs. Henderson told Jack as they loaded their 12-foot tree onto their truck. "Rose always said you understood the heart of the business." After the Hendersons left, Charlotte and Jack walked the property in relative silence. The afternoon sun cast long shadows through the trees, and the air was crisp and clean in her lungs. She'd forgotten how quiet the countryside could be, how different the quality of light was away from the city. "Your grandmother loved this time of day," Jack said as they paused at the edge of a field of young trees. "She'd walk these rows every evening, checking on things, planning for next year." "She never talked about retiring," Charlotte said. "Even when she got sick, she kept talking about new plantings, expanding the retail area." "She had a 5-year plan," Jack said. "Wanted to add a gift shop, maybe some educational programming for school groups. She thought the farm could be more than just trees. It could be a destination." Charlotte could see it. Families coming not just to buy trees, but to experience the magic of a working Christmas tree farm. Hay rides through the fields, hot chocolate by a fire, children learning about sustainable farming. It would require investment, marketing expertise, a vision for growth. It would require someone who cared enough to stay. "Jack," she said as they walked back toward the farmhouse, "what happens if I sell?" He was quiet for so long she thought he wasn't going to answer. Finally, he said, "Tom and Pete lose their jobs. The community loses a tradition. And whoever buys it probably turns it into something else entirely. And you? I'll figure something out. I always do." But she could hear the uncertainty in his voice, see the tension in his shoulders. Jack Shepherd had built his life around this farm, had invested 3 years of his expertise and passion into making it successful. If she sold, he'd lose more than a job. He'd lose his home. As they approached the farmhouse, Charlotte's phone buzzed with a text from her assistant. "Peterson presentation moved to Monday. Need revisions by tomorrow." Reality crashed back in. She had a life in Manhattan, responsibilities, a career that she'd worked 10 years to build. She couldn't just walk away from everything because of a Christmas tree farm and a man with green eyes who looked at her like she held his future in her hands. Could she? Chapter 3. Christmas magic begins. Charlotte spent Saturday morning in her grandmother's office, surrounded by ledgers and financial statements that painted a picture of a business that was healthy but not ambitious. Jack's record-keeping was meticulous. Every expense tracked, every sale recorded, every tax document filed precisely. What she didn't see was growth, expansion, the kind of aggressive marketing that could take Evergreen Acres from a local favorite to a regional destination. "Find anything interesting?" Jack asked from the doorway. He'd been giving her space to review the books, but she could sense his nervousness in the way he kept finding reasons to pass by the office. "You're very thorough," Charlotte said, looking up from a spreadsheet. "But you're thinking too small." Jack's expression tightened. "Meaning?" "Meaning you're running this like a family business, when you could be running it like a destination business." Charlotte turned the laptop screen toward him, showing the financial projections she'd been working on. "Look at your numbers. You sell 2,000 trees a year, but you could easily double that with the right marketing approach." Rose never wanted to get too big, Jack said, but she could see interest flickering in his eyes as he studied her projections. "My grandmother was thinking like someone who wanted to preserve a tradition," Charlotte said. "But traditions can grow. They can expand without losing their heart." She pulled up the website she'd been working on, a mock-up of what Evergreen Acres could become with proper online presence. Social media marketing, family experience packages, corporate sales. You've got the infrastructure. You just need to think bigger. Jack leaned over her shoulder to get a better look at the screen, and Charlotte caught the scent of pine and winter air that seemed to cling to him. She tried to ignore the way her pulse quickened at his proximity, focusing instead on the way his expression was changing as he looked at her ideas. "A petting zoo?" he asked, scrolling down the page. "Alpacas are very popular on social media," Charlotte said, "and they're actually good for the environment. Plus, kids love them. And this?" He pointed to another section. "Wedding venue. Think about it. A Christmas tree farm is incredibly romantic. You could do winter weddings, holiday parties, corporate retreats. The income would support the growing operation and provide year-round revenue." Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying the screen. Charlotte found herself holding her breath, waiting for his response. She'd gotten carried away with the possibilities, had spent the morning imagining what the farm could become, instead of figuring out how to sell it. "This would require significant investment," Jack said finally. "Yes, but the return would be worth it. You've got the foundation, Jack. You just need someone who understands marketing to help you build on it. Someone like you." The words hung between them, loaded with implication. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm as she realized what she'd been doing. She'd been planning a future for the farm as if she intended to be part of it. She started, then stopped. Her phone was buzzing with another text from her assistant, another reminder of the life waiting for her in Manhattan. "I should check this." The text was urgent. The Peterson account was threatening to walk if they didn't get the revised presentation by Monday morning. It was exactly the kind of crisis that usually sent her into high-stress mode. But sitting in her grandmother's office, with Jack reading over her shoulder, it felt distant and unimportant. "Work?" Jack asked. "Always," Charlotte said, setting the phone aside. "But it can wait." She expected him to ask about her job, her life in the city. But instead he said, "Come on, I want to show you something." They drove deeper into the property than Charlotte had been before, following a winding path that led up a hillside dotted with mature trees. The view from the top was breathtaking. The entire farm spread out below them. Thousands of Christmas trees arranged in neat rows that looked like green corduroy in the afternoon sun. "Your grandmother used to come up here when she needed to think," Jack said. She called it her perspective place. Charlotte could see why. From up here, the farm looked like something from a fairy tale. Perfect and peaceful and somehow magical. Snow sparkled on the pine branches, and the distant mountains created a natural frame around the valley. "It's beautiful," she said. She loved it most at Christmas, Jack said, when all the trees were harvested and the fields were full of stumps. She'd come up here and plan for next year. She'd say that's when she could really see the potential. They stood in comfortable silence, watching the sun sink lower in the sky. Charlotte found herself thinking about her grandmother, about the woman who'd built this place from nothing and turned it into something that mattered to an entire community. "Tell me about her," Charlotte said, "the Rose Winters you knew." Jack smiled, and Charlotte saw genuine affection in his expression. She was tough. Didn't take any nonsense, but she cared about everyone who worked for her. She knew everyone's kids' names, remembered birthdays, made sure people had what they needed. "That sounds like her," Charlotte said. "She raised me for a few years after my parents died. I remember her being strict but fair." "She talked about that time," Jack said, "how much she loved having you here, how proud she was when you graduated from college, started your career." "But she never told me about you," Charlotte said, "or about Tom and Pete, or the Hendersons, or any of the people who were obviously important to her." Jack was quiet for a moment. "Maybe she thought you wouldn't understand. Your life was so different from this." She was probably right, Charlotte admitted. 6 months ago, if someone had told me I'd inherit a Christmas tree farm, I would have laughed. I would have seen it as a complication, something to be dealt with quickly so I could get back to my real life. And now? Charlotte looked out over the farm, at the neat rows of trees that represented years of planning and care. At the farmhouse where Dee slept better than she had in months, at the man beside her who'd built his life around preserving her grandmother's legacy. "Now I'm not sure what my real life is supposed to be," she said. Before Jack could respond, her phone rang. The display showed her boss's number, and Charlotte felt the familiar spike of anxiety that came with unexpected calls from Richard Hartwell. "I have to take this," she said apologetically. "Charlotte," Richard's voice was sharp with irritation. "Where the hell are you? I've been trying to reach you all day. I'm in Vermont, settling my grandmother's estate. I told you I'd be back by Monday. Well, you need to be back tomorrow. The Peterson account is in crisis, and they're threatening to walk. I need you in the office first thing Sunday morning." Charlotte looked at Jack, who was politely pretending not to listen while studying the view. She thought about the presentation she'd been working on for the farm, about the possibilities she'd been exploring, about the way Jack's face had lit up when he'd seen her ideas. "I can handle it remotely," she said. "Send me the files, and I'll have the revision ready by Monday morning. This isn't negotiable, Charlotte. If you want to keep the Peterson account, if you want to keep your job, you'll be in my office tomorrow morning." The line went dead, leaving Charlotte staring at her phone. Richard Hartwell didn't make empty threats. If she didn't show up tomorrow, she could kiss her career goodbye. "Everything okay?" Jack asked. "I have to go back," Charlotte said, the words feeling like stones in her mouth. "Tomorrow." Something flickered across Jack's expression. Disappointment, maybe resignation. "Of course you do." "Jack, You don't owe me an explanation," he said, but she could hear the distance creeping back into his voice. "You have a life to get back to." They drove back to the farmhouse in silence, the easy companionship of the afternoon replaced by the weight of unspoken words. Charlotte packed her things mechanically, her mind spinning with everything she was leaving unfinished. She found Jack in the kitchen, cleaning up the dinner dishes with a methodical precision that seemed to characterize everything he did. "The farm records are back in the office," she said. "I'll need a few days to review everything and get appraisals." "Right," Jack said, without looking up from the sink. "How long do you think that will take?" "I don't know. A week? Maybe 2. "And then?" Charlotte wanted to tell him about the ideas she'd been developing, about the potential she saw on the farm, about the way being here had made her question everything she thought she wanted. Instead, she said, "I'll let you know." Jack nodded, still not looking at her. "I'll take care of things here." Charlotte lingered in the doorway, searching for words that wouldn't come. She wanted to explain about her job, about the career she'd built, about the impossibility of walking away from everything she'd worked for. But the words seemed inadequate in the face of what she was leaving behind. "Jack," she said finally, "this isn't what I wanted." He turned then, and the look in his eyes made her chest tighten. "What did you want, Charlotte?" She couldn't answer that, couldn't put into words the confusion and longing that had been building since she'd arrived. Instead, she said, "I'll call you when I know more about the timeline." "Sure," Jack said, but he'd already turned back to the dishes, effectively dismissing her. Charlotte drove away from Evergreen Acres as the sun set behind the mountains, her rearview mirror full of Christmas trees and the warm glow of the farmhouse windows. She told herself she was doing the right thing, that she couldn't throw away 10 years of career building for a man she'd known for 3 days and a farm she'd never intended to keep. But as the miles stretched between her and Vermont, she couldn't shake the feeling that she was driving away from something that mattered more than any job ever could. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Drive safe." 2 words that somehow contained everything they hadn't said to each other. Everything that was now hanging in the balance while she returned to a life that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. Chapter 4. Deepening Connection. Charlotte's Manhattan apartment felt like a museum after 3 days in Vermont. Everything was precisely arranged, aesthetically pleasing, and completely impersonal. She'd bought the furniture from a catalog, chosen the art to match the color scheme, selected everything for its visual impact rather than its comfort. After sleeping in her grandmother's guest room with its handmade quilts and family photos, her own bedroom felt sterile and cold. She'd managed to salvage the Peterson account with a presentation that her boss grudgingly approved, but the victory felt hollow. The client was satisfied, Richard Hartwell had backed down from his threats, and her job was secure. She should have been relieved. Instead, she found herself staring out her office window at the concrete jungle of Manhattan and thinking about pine trees. It had been a week since she'd left Vermont, a week of throwing herself into work and trying to forget about green eyes and flannel shirts and the way Jack Shepherd had looked at her business plans like she'd handed him the keys to the kingdom. She'd told herself it was for the best, that the attraction she'd felt was just the result of being out of her element, that she'd made the right choice by returning to her real life. But her real life felt increasingly unreal. Her phone rang, interrupting her brooding. "Charlotte Winters Marketing. Charlotte, it's Tom. From the farm." Charlotte's pulse quickened. "Tom? Is everything okay? Is Jack?" "Jack's fine," Tom said quickly. "Well, physically fine. But we have a situation here, and we need your help." "What kind of situation?" "There's a developer interested in the property. Made Jack an offer this morning for the whole farm. He's considering it." Charlotte felt like the floor had dropped out from under her. "He can't do that. The farm isn't his to sell." "No, but he's thinking about recommending it to you. Says it's a good offer, probably better than you could get anywhere else." "How much?" Charlotte asked, even though she wasn't sure she wanted to know. Tom named a figure that made Charlotte's eyes widen. It was substantially more than she'd been expecting. Enough to pay off her student loans, enough to buy a bigger apartment, enough to secure her financial future. "Charlotte, you still there?" "I'm here," she said. "Tom, why are you calling me? Shouldn't Jack be having this conversation?" "He should, but he won't. He's been walking around here like someone stole his Christmas for the past week. Won't talk about anything but work, won't even mention your name. But I saw his face when that developer showed up. This is killing him." Charlotte closed her eyes, trying to picture Jack's expression when faced with losing the farm he'd poured his heart into. "What do you want me to do?" "Come back," Tom said simply. "Talk to him. See the farm at Christmas before you make any decisions." "Tom, I can't just—" "The Christmas festival is this weekend," Tom continued, as if she hadn't spoken. "Rose started it 10 years ago. The whole town comes out. There's music and food and a tree lighting ceremony. Jack's been organizing it for the past 3 years, but this year his heart's not in it. He needs help." Charlotte looked around her sterile office, at the stack of reports on her desk, at the framed photo of herself accepting an award for marketing excellence. A week ago, these things had defined her success. Now they felt like props in someone else's life. "Charlotte," Tom said quietly, "I know this is asking a lot, but Rose believed in second chances, in fighting for things that matter. This place matters. Jack matters. And I think, despite everything, you matter to him too." After Tom hung up, Charlotte sat staring at her computer screen, trying to focus on the quarterly reports that needed her attention. But the numbers swam before her eyes, replaced by memories of pine trees and the sound of Jack's laugh, the way he'd looked at her business plans with such hope and possibility. Her assistant knocked on the door. "Charlotte?" Richard wants to see you in his office. Richard Hartwell's corner office was everything Charlotte aspired to. Floor-to-ceiling windows with a view of Central Park, awards lining the walls, expensive furniture that screamed success. Richard himself was in his 50s, silver-haired and sharp-eyed, the kind of man who wore his ambition like cologne. "Sit down, Charlotte," he said, without looking up from his laptop. "I want to talk to you about the Morrison account." The Morrison account was huge, a luxury hotel chain looking to rebrand their entire image. It was exactly the kind of high-profile, high-pressure project that Charlotte would normally jump at. "They want to meet next week," Richard continued. "If we land this, we're talking about a promotion for you. Senior director, your own team, corner office." Everything Charlotte had been working toward for the past 10 years was being offered to her on a silver platter. Senior director by 35 was ahead of schedule, even by her ambitious standards. "That's wonderful," she said, but the words felt mechanical. Richard looked up at her sharply. "You don't sound excited." "I am," Charlotte said quickly. "It's just been a long week." "Speaking of which, I trust your grandmother's affairs are settled? No more emergency trips to Vermont?" Charlotte thought about the developer's offer, about Jack walking around the farm like someone had stolen his Christmas, about Tom's voice when he'd asked her to come back. Actually, she heard herself say, "I need to go back this weekend. There are some loose ends to tie up." Richard's expression hardened. "Charlotte, I thought I made myself clear about your priorities. The Morrison meeting is Monday. I need you focused." "I can be back by Sunday night," Charlotte said. "I'll be ready for the meeting." "See that you are," Richard said, "because opportunities like this don't come around twice." After she left Richard's office, Charlotte found herself walking to Central Park instead of returning to her desk. The December air was cold and sharp, nothing like the clean, pine-scented air of Vermont, but it helped clear her head. She sat on a bench and pulled out her phone, scrolling through the contacts until she found Jack's number. Her finger hovered over the call button for a long moment before she finally pressed it. "Shepard." Jack answered on the second ring, his voice professional and distant. "Jack, it's Charlotte." There was a pause. "Charlotte, I wasn't expecting to hear from you." "Tom called me," she said. "He told me about the developer." Another pause, longer this time. "It's a good offer. You should consider it." "Is that what you want, for me to sell to them?" "What I want doesn't matter," Jack said, but she could hear something underneath the careful neutrality of his voice. "You have a life to live. This makes it easier." "What if I don't want easier?" The words were out before she could stop them, hanging in the air between them like a bridge she wasn't sure she was ready to cross. "Charlotte," Jack said, and his voice was gentler now, "you don't know what you're saying." "Maybe I do," she said. "Maybe I've been thinking about it all week. Maybe I've been thinking about a lot of things." "Like what?" Charlotte took a deep breath. "Like how my apartment feels like a hotel room. Like how I can't remember the last time I cared about anything as much as you care about that farm. Like how I've been so focused on building a career that I forgot to build a life." "Charlotte, I'm coming back," she said, "for the Christmas festival. Will you wait until then before you make any recommendations about the developer?" "You don't have to do that." "Yes, I do," Charlotte said, and she realized she meant it. "I need to see the farm at Christmas. I need to understand what I'd be giving up." "And your job?" Charlotte thought about Richard's ultimatum, about the Morrison account, about the promotion that represented everything she'd worked for. "I'll figure something out," she said. When she got back to her office, there was a message waiting from her assistant. Richard wanted to see her again. This time, when she walked into his office, his expression was thunderous. "I just got off the phone with Morrison," he said. "They want to move the meeting to Friday." "As in, this Friday." Charlotte felt her heart sink. Friday was the day of the Christmas festival, the day she'd promised to be back in Vermont. "Can we reschedule?" she asked. "No, we cannot reschedule," Richard snapped. "This is a multi-million-dollar account, Charlotte. They're not going to accommodate your personal schedule." Charlotte thought about Jack organizing the festival alone, about the tradition her grandmother had started, about the way Jack's face had looked when he'd seen her business plans for the farm. "Richard," she said carefully, What if I told you I might not be available for the Morrison account? Richard's expression went from thunderous to shocked. Are you having some kind of breakdown? Because if you are, I can recommend an excellent therapist. I'm not having a breakdown, Charlotte said. I'm having a realization. Which is? Charlotte looked around Richard's office again, at the symbols of success that had motivated her for so long. That maybe there are more important things than corner offices and promotion ladders, such as family legacy, such as community, such as finding work that actually matters. Richard stared at her like she'd sprouted a second head. Charlotte, you're one of the most talented marketers I've ever worked with. You have a brilliant career ahead of you. Don't throw it all away for some midlife crisis. I'm 32, Charlotte said, and maybe it's not a crisis. Maybe it's clarity. She walked out of Richard's office with her hands shaking and her heart pounding. She'd just committed career suicide, had walked away from everything she'd worked for over a Christmas tree farm and a man she'd known for 3 days. It should have felt terrifying. Instead, it felt like freedom. She spent the rest of the day making arrangements, booking a flight to Vermont, composing her resignation letter, calling her landlord about breaking her lease. With each decision, she felt lighter, as if she'd been carrying a weight she hadn't realized was there. That evening, she called Jack again. I'll be there Friday morning, she told him. And Jack? I'm not going anywhere. Not this time. The silence on the other end of the line stretched so long she thought he might have hung up. Charlotte, he said finally, and she could hear something in his voice that made her chest tighten. What are you doing? Something crazy, she said. Something right. Something I should have done a week ago. What about your job? I quit. What about your life in New York? Charlotte looked around her sterile apartment, at the life she'd built that suddenly felt like it belonged to someone else. I think my life might be in Vermont, she said. Chapter 5, Falling in Love. Charlotte's flight to Vermont was delayed by 3 hours due to weather, which meant didn't arrive at the farm until Friday evening. The Christmas festival was in full swing, and she could see the glow of lights and hear the sound of music drifting from the town square as her rental car wound through the familiar streets. When she pulled into the farm's driveway, her breath caught. The entire property was transformed into a winter wonderland. Thousands of white lights twinkled in the trees, luminarias lined the pathways, and the farmhouse glowed with warm yellow light from every window. There were people everywhere. Families with children, couples walking hand in hand, elderly visitors warming themselves around strategically placed fire barrels. She found Jack by the main barn, which had been converted into a makeshift gift shop and information center. He was helping a family load their tree onto their car, his movements efficient, despite the obvious exhaustion in his shoulders. When he straightened up and saw her walking toward him, his expression went through a range of emotions. Surprise, relief, something that looked like joy quickly followed by wariness. You came, he said when she reached him. Of course I came, Charlotte said. I said I would. You said a lot of things on the phone, Jack said, his green eyes searching her face. I wasn't sure how much of it you meant. Before Charlotte could answer, Tom appeared at Jack's shoulder, grinning from ear to ear. About time you got here. We've been running around like chickens with our heads cut off all day. Sorry I'm late, Charlotte said. Weather delays. Well, you're here now, Tom said, and just in time for the tree lighting ceremony. Charlotte looked around at the crowd of people, at the obvious success of the festival, at the way children were laughing as they ran between the trees. This is incredible. How many people are here? About 500 so far, Pete said, joining their group. Biggest turnout we've ever had. Rose would be proud, Jack said quietly, and Charlotte caught the way his voice softened when he mentioned her grandmother. She would be, Charlotte agreed, but I think she'd be prouder of the fact that you kept it going. Their eyes met and held, and Charlotte felt that familiar flutter in her chest that had been haunting her dreams for the past week. Jack looked tired but happy, his cheeks flushed from the cold, his hair slightly mussed from the wind. He was wearing the same type of flannel shirt she'd first seen him in, but tonight he'd added a tie and a wool coat that made him look less like a farmer and more like, well, like a man she could easily fall in love with. "Charlotte!" a voice called out across the crowd. Mrs. Henderson from the hardware store was waving at her, making her way through the crowd with her husband in tow. "I heard you were back. How wonderful." Charlotte found herself swept into the social current of the festival, introduced to what seemed like half the town as Rose's granddaughter, and the marketing expert who's going to help expand the farm. She tried to correct people about her role, but Jack kept appearing at her elbow with new people to meet, new stories to hear about her grandmother's involvement in the community. She donated Christmas trees to the church every year, the pastor told her. Never wanted recognition, just quietly made sure we had what we needed for our Christmas Eve service. And she always made sure the volunteer fire department had a tree for their holiday fundraiser, the fire chief added. Biggest, most beautiful tree on the lot, every year. Story after story, person after person, all painting a picture of a woman who'd been deeply woven into the fabric of this community. Charlotte began to understand why her grandmother had never talked much about the farm during their phone calls. It hadn't been about the business. It had been about the people, the relationships, the way she'd used the farm as a vehicle for taking care of others. She was something special, Jack said quietly as they walked toward the town square for the tree lighting ceremony. I don't think I really understood how much she did for people until after she was gone. She never mentioned most of this, Charlotte said. The donations, the community involvement, she just talked about the trees, the growing seasons. That was Rose, Jack said. She did good things because they needed doing, not because she wanted credit. The tree lighting ceremony was held in the town square, around a massive Fraser fir that Charlotte recognized from the farm. The mayor gave a short speech about community traditions and the importance of supporting local businesses, and then the entire crowd counted down from 10 as the tree burst into light. Charlotte found herself standing next to Jack, close enough to feel the warmth radiating from his body in the cold air. When the tree lit up, and the crowd cheered, she looked up to find him watching her instead of the ceremony. "What?" she asked. "Just thinking about the first night you were here," Jack said. "How different things are now." "Different how?" "Then you were a stranger who was probably going to sell the farm out from under us," Jack said. Now? Jack looked like he was about to say something important, but before he could, the crowd began to disperse and people started approaching them again. The moment was lost in a flurry of goodbyes and thanks for organizing such a wonderful event. It was nearly midnight by the time the last visitors left the farm. Charlotte, Jack, Tom, and Pete worked together to clean up the debris, extinguish the fire barrels, and secure the gift shop. The work was companionable, punctuated by easy conversation and shared laughter over some of the evening's highlights. "Did you see the look on Jimmy Patterson's face when his tree toppled over in the parking lot?" Pete asked, chuckling. "Poor kid," Tom said. "But at least it didn't hit anyone. And Mrs. Morrison bought 3 trees," Jack added. "Said she needed one for every room in her house." "Business was good tonight," Charlotte observed. "How did the numbers compare to previous years?" "Best year we've ever had," Jack said. "Thanks to your marketing suggestions." Charlotte looked at him in surprise. "What marketing suggestions?" "The social media posts, the email list, the partnerships with local businesses," Jack said. "I implemented most of the ideas you left behind." "You did?" "Of course I did. They were good ideas." After Tom and Pete headed home, Charlotte and Jack found themselves alone on the farmhouse porch, looking out over the festival lights that still twinkled in the trees. The night was clear and cold, with stars visible in a way that was impossible in Manhattan. "I can't believe you implemented my suggestions," Charlotte said. "Why wouldn't I?" Jack asked. "You know what you're doing. Tonight proved that, but you were so resistant to expansion, to thinking bigger." Jack was quiet for a moment, his hands wrapped around a mug of hot chocolate that had gone cold during the cleanup. "I was scared," he said finally. "Of what?" "Of changing something that was working. Of losing what made this place special. Of failing Rose." Charlotte felt her heart squeeze at the vulnerability in his voice. "You could never fail her, Jack. Look at what you've built here. Look at how much people love this place. "It's not just about the farm," Jack said, and there was something in his voice that made Charlotte's pulse quicken. "I was scared of other things too." "Like what?" Jack turned to face her, and in the soft light from the porch lamp, his green eyes looked almost luminous, like letting myself care about someone who was probably going to leave. Charlotte felt her breath catch. "Jack, I know you quit your job," he said. "Tom told me. But I need to know why. Was it really about the farm, or was it about something else?" Charlotte looked at him, at this man who'd somehow become central to every decision she'd made over the past week, who'd made her question everything she thought she wanted out of life. "It was about you," she said quietly. "It was about the way you looked at my business plans like I'd handed you a miracle. It was about the way you care about this place, about the people who work here, about preserving something that matters. It was about the fact that I've never felt as alive as I did during those 3 days I spent here." Jack set down his mug and took a step closer to her. "Charlotte, you don't know what you're saying. You had an entire life in New York, a career, success, everything you worked for." "I had a job," Charlotte corrected. "I had an apartment full of furniture I didn't choose and art I didn't love. I had a life that looked successful from the outside but felt empty from the inside. And then I came here, and for the first time in years, I felt like I was exactly where I was supposed to be." "And what about when the novelty wears off?" Jack asked. "What about when you realize what you've given up?" Charlotte reached out and took his hands, feeling the calluses from years of farm work, the strength in his fingers. "What if instead of focusing on what I've given up, we focus on what I've found? Which is a place where my skills matter, work that has meaning beyond profit margins, a community that takes care of each other." She paused, gathering courage. "You." Jack's hands tightened around hers. "Charlotte, I know it's crazy," she said quickly. "I know we've only known each other for a week, and I know I turned your life upside down just by showing up. But I also know that every important decision I've made in the past 7 days has been about getting back to you." Jack stared at her for a long moment, his green eyes searching her face. Then, slowly, he lifted one hand to cup her cheek. "I've been thinking about you every day since you left," he said quietly, "wondering what you were doing, whether you were thinking about this place at all, whether I'd imagined the connection I felt." "You didn't imagine it," Charlotte whispered. "I've never felt this way about anyone," Jack continued. "Never met someone who could see possibilities I couldn't see, who could make me want to be braver, better. Jack, I'm falling in love with you," he said, the words soft and sure in the cold night air. "I know it's too soon, I know it's complicated, but I needed you to know." Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes, not from sadness, but from the overwhelming rightness of hearing those words, of finally acknowledging what she'd been feeling since the moment she'd tumbled into that snowbank with him. "I'm falling in love with you too," she said. "I think I have been since that first day, when you looked at me like I was someone worth saving." Jack's thumb brushed across her cheekbone, wiping away a tear she hadn't realized had fallen. "You saved me too," he said. "This place, these people, we all needed you. I needed you." When he kissed her, it was soft and sweet and full of promise. Charlotte melted into him, her hands fisting in his coat as she kissed him back with all the emotion she'd been holding inside for the past week. He tasted like hot chocolate and winter air, and when they finally broke apart, she was breathless. "So what happens now?" Jack asked, his forehead resting against hers. "Now we figure it out together," Charlotte said. "We build something amazing with this farm. We take care of the people who depend on us. We see where this goes." "I like the sound of that," Jack said, and kissed her again. Above them, the Christmas lights twinkled in the pine trees, and Charlotte realized that for the first time in her adult life, she wasn't worried about the future. She was exactly where she belonged, with exactly the right person, ready to build exactly the kind of life that mattered. Chapter 6. The conflict. Charlotte woke Monday morning to the sound of her phone ringing persistently on the nightstand. She'd moved into the farmhouse guest room permanently, and the past 3 days had been a blur of planning and preparation. She and Jack had been working on expanding the business plan. Tom and Pete had been enthusiastic about the changes. and Charlotte had felt more energized and purposeful than she had in years. The caller ID showed Richard Hartwell's number, and Charlotte's stomach dropped. She'd sent her resignation letter via email, but she'd been dreading the inevitable confrontation. "Charlotte?" Richard's voice was ice-cold when she answered. "I got your email." "Good morning, Richard," Charlotte said, trying to keep her voice steady. "Don't good morning me. What the hell do you think you're doing?" Charlotte walked to the kitchen window, looking out at the farm where Jack was already working despite the early hour. The sight of him checking tree inventory with his characteristic thoroughness gave her strength. "I'm resigning," she said simply. "Over a Christmas tree farm," Richard said, his voice dripping with disbelief. "You're throwing away a brilliant career, a promotion, a corner office, over trees." "I'm not throwing anything away," Charlotte said. "I'm choosing something better." "Better?" Richard laughed harshly. "Charlotte, you're having some kind of breakdown. This isn't you. You're ambitious, driven, successful. You don't throw it all away to play farmer in the middle of nowhere." "Maybe the person you're describing isn't who I want to be anymore," Charlotte said. "Don't be ridiculous. Take a leave of absence if you need to clear your head, but don't make decisions you'll regret." "I won't regret this," Charlotte said, but even as she said it, she felt a flicker of doubt. Was she being impulsive? Was she making a mistake that would haunt her for the rest of her life? "You will," Richard said with certainty. "When you're struggling to make ends meet on a farm that probably barely breaks even, when you realize you've wasted your talent on something that doesn't matter, you'll regret it. But by then, it'll be too late. Opportunities like this don't come around twice." After Richard hung up, Charlotte sat in the kitchen feeling shaken. She'd been so sure of her decision, so confident that she was doing the right thing, but Richard's words had planted a seed of uncertainty that she couldn't shake. Her phone buzzed with a text from her former assistant. "Heard about your resignation. Morrison account went to Jenkins. He got the promotion you were up for. Are you sure about this?" Charlotte stared at the message, feeling a stab of something that might have been regret. David Jenkins was a competent marketer, but he didn't have her creativity or her strategic vision. The Morrison account should have been hers, along with the promotion and the corner office. "Morning," Jack said, coming into the kitchen with snow in his hair and a smile on his face. "How'd you sleep?" "Fine," Charlotte said, but she could hear the strain in her own voice. Jack's expression immediately grew concerned. "What's wrong?" "Nothing," Charlotte said quickly. "Just work stuff. Former work stuff." Jack poured himself coffee and sat down across from her. "Want to talk about it?" Charlotte looked at him, at his flannel shirt that had seen better days, at his work-worn hands wrapped around a mug that had a chip in the handle, at the genuine concern in his green eyes. Yesterday, all of that had seemed romantic and authentic and real. This morning, it felt like everything she'd given up to be here. "My boss called," she said. "He thinks I'm making a huge mistake." "What do you think?" "I don't know," Charlotte admitted. "Yesterday I was so sure. But now you're wondering if you've thrown away everything you worked for," Jack said quietly. Charlotte nodded, not trusting her voice. Jack was quiet for a long moment, studying her face. "Charlotte, can I ask you something?" "Of course. Why did you really come back here?" The question caught her off guard. "What do you mean? Was it really about the farm? About building something together? Or was it about running away from something you didn't want to face?" Charlotte felt her cheeks flush. "That's not fair, isn't it?" Jack's voice was gentle but direct. "You were under pressure at work, you had a crisis of confidence, and you found an escape route. But escape routes aren't the same as life choices. You think I'm running away?" "I think you're scared," Jack said, "and I think you're looking for someone to tell you that you've made the right choice. But I can't do that for you, Charlotte. Only you can decide what you want." Charlotte felt anger rising in her chest. "So you don't want me here?" "That's not what I said." "Then what are you saying?" Jack ran a hand through his hair, looking frustrated. "I'm saying that I don't want to be the reason you make a decision you'll regret. I don't want to be the guy who convinced you to give up your dreams. What if my dreams have changed? Have they? Or are you just scared of failing at the dreams you had?" The words hit Charlotte like a physical blow. She stood up abruptly, pacing to the window. "I can't believe you're saying this. Someone has to," Jack said. Charlotte, I care about you. Maybe I'm falling in love with you, but I won't let you use me as an excuse to avoid making hard choices about your own life. I'm not using you, aren't you? Jack interrupted. 3 weeks ago, you'd never heard of me. You had a clear career path, specific goals, a life you'd spent 10 years building. And now you're ready to throw it all away for a man you barely know? Charlotte whirled around to face him. I thought you wanted me to stay. I do, Jack said simply. But I want you to stay because you genuinely want to be here, not because you're afraid to be anywhere else. Before Charlotte could respond, her phone rang again. This time, it was her college roommate, Sarah, who was now a successful lawyer in Chicago. I have to take this, Charlotte said, grateful for the interruption. Charlotte, what is going on? Sarah's voice was concerned. I just heard from Madison that you quit your job to run a Christmas tree farm. Please tell me this is some kind of elaborate joke. It's not a joke, Charlotte said, stepping out onto the porch for privacy. Okay, I'm trying to understand this, Sarah said. You spent 10 years building an amazing career. You were about to get promoted to senior director, and you're throwing it all away for what? A guy you met a week ago? It's not about Jack, Charlotte said, but the words sounded hollow even to her. Really? Because from where I'm sitting, it looks like you're having some kind of romantic fantasy about rural life. But Charlotte, fantasy isn't reality. Reality is rent payments and career advancement, and building a future that actually makes sense. Maybe I don't want the kind of future that makes sense to everyone else, Charlotte said. Or maybe you're scared of succeeding, Sarah said bluntly. Maybe you're scared of taking on more responsibility, more pressure, so you're running away to play house with a farmer. Charlotte felt tears prick at her eyes. That's not what this is, isn't it? Charlotte, I love you, but you've always been a little bit of a perfectionist. And sometimes perfectionism can look like self-sabotage when things get too real. After Sarah hung up, Charlotte sat on the porch steps, her head in her hands. 2 conversations in one morning, and both had left her questioning everything she thought she knew about her own motivations. Was she running away? Was she using Jack and the farm as an excuse to avoid facing the challenges of her real career? Was she really ready to build a life in Vermont, or was she just scared of failing in Manhattan? When she went back inside, Jack was gone. She found a note on the kitchen counter, gone to check the north fields. Take some time to think. Jay, the note was kind but distant, and Charlotte realized that her uncertainty had created a rift between them. Jack was protecting himself, and she couldn't blame him. If she wasn't sure about her own motivations, how could she expect him to trust her decision to stay? Charlotte spent the morning walking the farm trying to sort through her feelings. She loved being here, loved the sense of purpose and community, loved the way Jack looked at her like she was someone worth believing in. But was that enough to base a life-changing decision on? Her phone buzzed with an email from a headhunter. Heard you might be looking for new opportunities. Have several senior director positions that would be perfect for you. Interested? Charlotte stared at the email for a long time. 3 weeks ago, she would have been thrilled to have headhunters reaching out. Now, the idea of going back to that world felt like stepping into clothes that no longer fit. But maybe that was just fear talking. Maybe Jack was right, and she was running away from challenges instead of running toward something better. When Jack returned that afternoon, Charlotte was in the office, staring at financial projections that suddenly looked daunting instead of exciting. Figure anything out? He asked from the doorway. I think I'm confused, Charlotte admitted. Jack sat down across from her, and she could see the careful neutrality in his expression. About what? About whether I'm making the right choice for the right reasons, Charlotte said. About whether I'm being brave or just being scared. And I think I need some time to be sure, Charlotte said, the words feeling like glass in her throat. Jack nodded slowly. How much time? I don't know. Maybe I should go back to New York for a while. Clear my head. Make sure I'm not just running away from something. And if you decide you want your old life back? Charlotte looked at him, at the man she'd fallen in love with, at the future they'd started planning together. Then I guess we'll both know where we stand. Jack was quiet for a long moment. When he spoke, his voice was carefully controlled. I think that's probably smart. Jack, "No, you're right," he said, standing up. "Better to be sure now than to regret it later." Charlotte watched him walk away, feeling like she'd just made the biggest mistake of her life. But she also felt like she'd just chosen the only path that made sense. She had to be sure, and the only way to be sure was to leave. Chapter 7. Christmas Resolution. Charlotte had been back in Manhattan for a week, and every day felt like walking through someone else's life. She'd taken a room at a boutique hotel rather than returning to her apartment, which was still under lease, but felt like a museum of the person she used to be. The headhunter had arranged 3 interviews, all for positions that were supposedly perfect for her skill set and career trajectory. She'd been impressive in each meeting, fielding questions about market penetration and brand positioning with the expertise that had made her reputation. The companies were interested. One had already called back about a second interview. But sitting in those sleek conference rooms, discussing quarterly projections and competitive analysis, Charlotte felt like she was performing a role in a play she no longer wanted to be in. Her phone buzzed with a text from Jack. "Tree sales going well. Tom says hi." It was their first communication in 3 days, and the careful neutrality of it made Charlotte's chest tighten. She'd hurt him by leaving, had probably confirmed his suspicions that she wasn't serious about building a life in Vermont. But she'd also been right to leave. She needed to be sure of her motivations before she made a commitment that would affect both their lives. The problem was, a week of thinking hadn't brought her any closer to certainty. If anything, she was more confused than ever. Charlotte was staring out her hotel window at the traffic-clogged streets below when her phone rang. The caller ID showed her grandmother's attorney. "Miss Winters, I hope I'm not calling at a bad time," he said. "I have some paperwork that needs your signature regarding the farm's estate tax obligations." "Of course," Charlotte said. "Should I come to your office?" "Actually, I was hoping to bring the documents to you. I have some other business in New York this week, but I'd also like to discuss something else with you, if you have time." They met at a quiet cafe in Midtown, and Charlotte was surprised to see that the attorney, Mr. Peterson, looked concerned. "I've been the Winters family attorney for 30 years, he said after they'd ordered coffee. "I handled your parents' estate, your grandmother's affairs, and now yours. I hope you'll forgive me if I speak plainly." "Please do," Charlotte said. "I've been hearing rumors about your intentions for the farm," Mr. Peterson said, "that you might be considering selling to a development company." Charlotte's heart sank. Word traveled fast in small towns. "I haven't made any decisions." "I see. And what about Mr. Shepard? I understand he's been running the operation very successfully." "He has," Charlotte said carefully. "Jack has done an amazing job." Mr. Peterson studied her face for a moment. "Miss Winters, I hope you won't think me presumptuous, but I have something to show you." He pulled out an envelope that looked worn with age. "Your grandmother asked me to give this to you if you ever seemed uncertain about the farm's future." Charlotte opened the envelope with trembling fingers. Inside was a letter in her grandmother's familiar handwriting. "My dear Charlotte, if you're reading this, it means you're facing a choice about the farm, and you're not sure what to do. I understand. The farm represents a completely different life from the one you've built for yourself, and change is never easy. I want you to know that whatever you decide, I'm proud of you. You've accomplished so much, become such a successful, independent woman. Your parents would be proud too. But I also want you to understand what the farm really is. It's not just a business, though it's certainly that. It's not just a piece of property, though the land is beautiful. The farm is a way of taking care of people, the families who come to find their perfect Christmas tree, the employees who depend on steady work, the community that gathers here for celebrations and comfort. When I started the Christmas festival, it wasn't because I wanted to increase sales. It was because I saw how much joy people found in simple traditions, in gathering together, in celebrating the magic of Christmas. The farm became a place where people could create memories, where children could experience wonder, where families could continue traditions that connected them to something larger than themselves. I know you might think that kind of work is small compared to your career achievements. But Charlotte, there's nothing small about work that brings joy to others. There's nothing small about preserving traditions that matter. There's nothing small about building something that will outlast you. The farm needs someone who understands both the business side and the heart side. Someone who can help it grow while keeping its soul intact. I always hoped that person might be you, but I also know that you have to choose a life that makes you happy. Whatever you decide, know that you're loved, and know that sometimes the most important choices we make are the ones that scare us the most. All my love, Grandma Rose. P.S. Jack Shepherd is a good man who loves the farm almost as much as I do. Be kind to each other. Charlotte had to stop reading twice because her vision was blurred with tears. When she finished, she looked up to find Mr. Peterson watching her with gentle concern. Your grandmother was a wise woman, he said quietly. She was, Charlotte agreed. Mr. Peterson, can I ask you something? Of course. Did she ever regret staying in Vermont? Ever wonder what her life might have been like if she'd moved to the city, pursued something bigger? Mr. Peterson smiled. I asked her that once, many years ago. She told me that she'd learned the difference between a big life and a meaningful life. She said they weren't necessarily the same thing. After Mr. Peterson left, Charlotte walked through Central Park, her grandmother's letter folded carefully in her coat pocket. The December afternoon was gray and cold, with the kind of wind that cut through even the best winter coat. Around her, the city hummed with its usual energy. People rushing to meetings, tourists trying to navigate the subway system, vendors selling everything from hot dogs to knockoff designer handbags. It was exciting and dynamic and full of opportunities. It was also exhausting and impersonal and sometimes lonely in a way that made her chest ache. Charlotte's phone rang, and she was surprised to see Sarah's number. Hey, Sarah said. How are you holding up? I'm okay, Charlotte said. Confused, but okay. I've been thinking about our conversation last week, Sarah said. About you running away, being scared of success. I think I might have been wrong. What do you mean? I was projecting. I'm the one who's scared of change, scared of taking risks. You're the one who's always been willing to bet on yourself, even when it seemed crazy. Charlotte stopped walking. Sarah, let me finish, Sarah said. Remember when you decided to double major in college? Everyone said it was too much work, that you'd burn out. But you knew what you wanted. Remember when you took that first job in New York instead of the safe position in Chicago? Everyone said you were being reckless, but you knew you needed to challenge yourself. This is different, Charlotte said. Is it? Or is it just the first time you've made a choice based on your heart instead of your head? I don't know, Charlotte admitted. Charlotte, I've known you for 15 years. You've never been the kind of person who runs away from things. You run toward them. Maybe you're not running away from your career. Maybe you're running toward something better. After Sarah hung up, Charlotte found herself standing in front of the Plaza Hotel, where she'd attended a conference just 2 months ago. She remembered standing in that same spot, looking up at the elegant facade and thinking about how far she'd come, how much she'd achieved. Now looking at the same building, she felt nothing. No pride, no excitement, no sense of possibility. The corporate world that had once energized her now felt like a beautiful cage. Her phone buzzed with another text from Jack. Christmas Eve party is tomorrow. Wish you were here. Charlotte stared at the message for a long time. Tomorrow was Christmas Eve, the culmination of the holiday season that had brought her to Vermont in the first place. She could picture the farmhouse filled with friends and neighbors, could almost smell the pine and cinnamon, could imagine Jack moving through the crowd with easy grace, making sure everyone felt welcome. She could also picture herself in her hotel room, ordering room service and watching holiday movies alone. The choice had never been clearer. Charlotte hailed a taxi and gave the driver her hotel address. She had packing to do and a flight to catch. She'd spent a week trying to talk herself out of the best decision she'd ever made, but her grandmother's letter had reminded her of what really mattered. She wasn't running away from anything. She was running home. The flight to Vermont was packed with holiday travelers, and Charlotte found herself squeezed into a middle seat between a businessman who kept checking his phone and a grandmother who was traveling to visit her family. The grandmother, Mrs. Chen, struck up a conversation somewhere over Connecticut. Are you going home for Christmas? Mrs. Chen asked. Yes, Charlotte said. and realized it was the first time she'd thought of Vermont as home. I'm going home. That's wonderful. Family is the most important thing, especially at Christmas. Actually, I'm going to see. Charlotte paused, not sure how to categorize Jack. Someone I care about very much, Mrs. Chen smiled. That's even better. Nothing beats a Christmas romance. Charlotte's flight was delayed, and by the time she finally arrived at the farm, the Christmas Eve party was in full swing. She could see cars lining the driveway, lights blazing from every window of the farmhouse, and people moving around on the porch despite the cold. She sat in her rental car for a moment, suddenly nervous. What if Jack didn't want her back? What if she'd hurt him too much by leaving? What if he'd realized that he was better off without someone who couldn't make up her mind? Before she could lose her nerve, Charlotte grabbed her suitcase and walked toward the farmhouse. She could hear laughter and music drifting from inside, could smell wood smoke and baking cookies. Through the windows, she could see familiar faces: Tom and Pete, the Hendersons, Mrs. Morrison with her 3 Christmas trees, dozens of other people who'd become part of her extended family without her even realizing it. Charlotte knocked on the front door, her heart pounding. After a moment, it opened to reveal Tom, who broke into a huge grin when he saw her. "Well, I'll be damned," he said. "Look who's home for Christmas." "Is Jack here?" Charlotte asked. "In the kitchen, playing host," Tom said. "Go on, he's been moping around all week. Could use some cheering up." Charlotte made her way through the crowded living room, accepting hugs and greetings from people who acted like she'd been gone for months instead of a week. The warmth of their welcome made her eyes prick with tears. These people had accepted her as part of their community, had included her in their celebration without question. She found Jack in the kitchen, pulling a tray of cookies from the oven. He was wearing a red sweater that brought out his eyes, and his hair was slightly mussed from the heat of the kitchen. He looked tired but happy, and Charlotte's heart did a familiar flip at the sight of him. "Jack," she said softly. He turned, and the expression that crossed his face was worth the entire uncomfortable week in Manhattan. Surprise, joy, hope, and something that looked like relief all flickered across his features before settling into cautious welcome. "Charlotte," he said, setting down the cookie tray, "I didn't know you were coming." "I wasn't sure myself until this afternoon," Charlotte said. "Can we talk?" Jack nodded and led her onto the porch, where they could have privacy despite the cold. Charlotte could see her breath in the air, but she barely noticed the temperature. All her attention was focused on Jack, on the way he was looking at her like he was afraid she might disappear again. "I'm sorry," she said without preamble. "I'm sorry I left, I'm sorry I hurt you, and I'm sorry I made you doubt my commitment to this place. To us." "Charlotte, let me finish," she said. "I needed to be sure of my motivations, and I was right to take time to think. But I was wrong about what I'd find when I did." "What did you find?" "I found out that you were right. I was scared, but not of the things you thought." Charlotte took a step closer to him. "I wasn't scared of failing in my career. I was scared of succeeding at something that didn't make me happy. I was scared of admitting that everything I'd worked for didn't matter as much as I thought it did." Jack's expression softened. "And now? Now I know that the farm isn't an escape from my real life. It is my real life. This is where I belong, Jack. With you, with this community, building something that matters. What about your career, your ambitions?" Charlotte pulled her grandmother's letter from her pocket and showed it to Jack. "My grandmother taught me the difference between a big life and a meaningful life. I want a meaningful life, Jack. I want to wake up every morning excited about the work I'm doing. I want to be part of something that brings joy to people. I want to build a future with someone who shares my values." Jack read the letter, his expression growing soft. When he finished, he looked up at her with eyes that were bright with emotion. "Are you sure?" he asked. "Because I can't go through this again, Charlotte. If you're going to stay, you have to really stay." "I'm sure," Charlotte said. "I quit my job. I mean, really quit this time. I gave up my apartment. I told the headhunters I wasn't interested. I'm all in, Jack. Completely, totally, all in." Jack stared at her for a moment, and Charlotte held her breath, waiting for his response. Then he smiled. That slow, genuine smile that had made her fall in love with him in the first place. "In that case," he said, pulling her into his arms. "Welcome home." When he kissed her, Charlotte felt everything fall into place. This was right. This was real. This was exactly where she belonged. Around them, the Christmas party continued, but Charlotte was only aware of Jack, of the way he held her like she was precious, of the way he whispered, "I love you," against her lips like a prayer. "I love you too," she whispered back, "and I'm never leaving again." "Good," Jack said, his forehead resting against hers, "because I have big plans for us." "What kind of plans?" "The kind that involve expanding the business, building something amazing together, and maybe adding some alpacas to the operation." Charlotte laughed, feeling lighter than she had in weeks. "Alpacas? You're the one who said they were good for social media," Jack pointed out. "I did say that," Charlotte agreed. "Among other things, speaking of which," Jack said, pulling back to look at her seriously, "I implemented most of your marketing suggestions while you were gone. The results have been incredible." "Really?" "Really. We're booked solid for next season. We've got 3 corporate clients interested in hosting events here, and Mrs. Henderson wants to partner with us on a whole line of local Christmas products." Charlotte felt a thrill of excitement. "That's amazing." "It's just the beginning," Jack said. "If you're really serious about staying, about building this together, I think we could turn Evergreen Acres into something special, something that honors your grandmother's legacy while creating something entirely new." "I'm serious," Charlotte said. "More serious than I've ever been about anything." Jack smiled and kissed her again, and Charlotte tasted the future in that kiss. A future full of Christmas trees and community celebrations, of hard work and shared dreams, of love that grew stronger with each season. When they went back inside, the party guests burst into applause. Charlotte felt her cheeks warm as people congratulated her on coming to her senses and welcomed her back to the community. Tom raised a toast to the newest permanent resident of Vermont, and Pete announced that he'd already started planning improvements to the retail area. But the moment Charlotte would remember most was when Mrs. Henderson pulled her aside and said, "Your grandmother would be so proud. She always said this place needed someone with vision and heart. I think she knew it would be you." As the party wound down and guests began to head home, Charlotte found herself helping Jack clean up in the kitchen. It was a domestic scene that felt both natural and significant, the first of many such scenes they'd share in the years to come. "So what happens now?" Charlotte asked as she loaded the dishwasher. "Now we plan," Jack said. "We figure out how to turn all those ideas of yours into reality. We build something amazing. Together?" "Together," Jack confirmed. "Partners in every sense of the word." Charlotte looked around the kitchen that was already starting to feel like hers, at the man who'd become her anchor and her adventure, at the life that was waiting for them to build it. "I can't wait," she said, and for the first time in her adult life, Charlotte Winters was exactly where she belonged. Chapter 8. Epilogue. 1 year later, Christmas Eve. 1 year later, Charlotte stood at the edge of the newly expanded retail area, watching families move through the holiday market she and Jack had created. The past year had been a whirlwind of growth and change, but looking at the scene before her, she knew every moment of hard work had been worth it. The gift shop was bustling with customers buying locally made ornaments, Rose's famous cookie recipe which Charlotte had finally mastered, and the pine-scented candles that had become one of their best sellers. The new cafe served hot chocolate and fresh baked goods, while the children's area featured story time and ornament-making workshops. And yes, there were alpacas. 3 of them, actually, in a small petting area that had become wildly popular on social media. Charlotte had been right about their Instagram appeal. Evergreen Acres alpacas had gone viral twice. "Penny for your thoughts?" Jack said, appearing at her elbow with 2 steaming mugs of hot chocolate. "Just thinking about how much has changed," Charlotte said, accepting the mug gratefully. The December air was crisp, and her breath formed small clouds as she spoke. "Good changes?" "The best changes," Charlotte said, leaning into his warmth. "I can't believe we pulled all this off in 1 year." It had been an incredible year. The wedding venue had hosted 12 couples, including a Christmas Eve ceremony that had been featured in Vermont Life magazine. The corporate retreat business had brought in steady revenue during the off-season. The online marketing campaign Charlotte had developed had tripled their reach, bringing families from 3 states to visit Evergreen Acres. But the numbers, impressive as they were, weren't what made Charlotte proud. It was the way they'd managed to expand while keeping the heart of what made the farm special. It was the traditions they'd preserved and the new ones they'd created. It was the community they'd built and the joy they brought to people's lives. "Tom's looking pretty pleased with himself," Jack observed, nodding toward the tree lot where Tom was helping a family load their tree. "He should be," Charlotte said. "The new spacing system was his idea, and it's working perfectly." Tom had been promoted to assistant manager, and Pete had taken over the corporate accounts. They'd hired 3 new seasonal employees and were already planning to add more for the following year. Rose's 5-year plan, the one Jack had mentioned during Charlotte's first visit, had been accomplished in 12 months. "And Pete's already planning next year's expansion," Jack added. "What does he want to add now?" Charlotte asked, though she was smiling. Pete's enthusiasm for growth had become legendary. "A corn maze for the fall season," Jack said. "And maybe some summer programs for kids." "A corn maze?" Charlotte laughed. "We might need to buy more land." "Funny you should mention that," Jack said, and something in his tone made Charlotte look at him more closely. "What aren't you telling me?" Jack's smile was both mischievous and nervous. "The Johnson farm next door is going up for sale. The family wants to retire and move south." Charlotte's eyes widened. The Johnson property was another 50 acres of prime land, including a barn that could be converted and a field that would be perfect for Pete's corn maze. "Jack, that's amazing. Do you think we could—" She stopped, studying his expression. "You've already made an offer, haven't you?" "I might have had a conversation with their realtor," Jack admitted, "but I wanted to discuss it with my business partner before making any commitments." "Your business partner?" Charlotte raised an eyebrow. "Is that what I am?" "Among other things," Jack said. And now his expression was definitely nervous. "Actually, that's something else I wanted to discuss with you." Before Charlotte could ask what he meant, Jack was reaching into his coat pocket. When he pulled out a small velvet box, Charlotte's heart stopped. "Jack," she whispered. "I know it's Christmas Eve," he said, dropping to one knee right there in the middle of their bustling holiday market. "I know we're surrounded by people and alpacas and chaos, but I couldn't wait another minute." Around them, Charlotte was dimly aware that people were starting to notice, that conversations were stopping and cameras were coming out, but all her attention was focused on Jack, on the way the lights from the Christmas trees reflected in his green eyes, on the way his hands were shaking slightly as he opened the ring box. "Charlotte Winters," he said, his voice strong and sure despite his nerves. "A year ago you crashed into my life and turned everything upside down. You made me believe in possibilities I'd never imagined. You made me want to be braver, to dream bigger, to build something amazing." Charlotte felt tears starting in her eyes as she looked down at the ring, a vintage setting with a stone that caught the light like captured starlight. "You've made me a better man," Jack continued. "You've made this farm a better place. You've made our community stronger and our future brighter. I love your ambition and your kindness, your vision and your heart. I love the way you make everything better just by being part of it, Jack," Charlotte whispered. But he wasn't finished. "I love you, Charlotte. I want to spend the rest of my life loving you, building dreams with you, creating traditions with you. Will you marry me?" For a moment, Charlotte couldn't speak. She looked at this man who'd become her partner in every sense of the word, who'd supported her wildest ideas and helped make them reality, who taught her the difference between success and fulfillment. "Yes," she said, laughing as tears spilled down her cheeks. "Yes, of course, yes." The crowd that had gathered burst into applause as Jack slipped the ring onto her finger. Charlotte barely noticed. She was too busy kissing her fiancé, too overwhelmed by joy to care about anything else. "I love you," she whispered against his lips. "I love you too," he whispered back. "Partner." The rest of the evening passed in a blur of congratulations and celebrations. Tom and Pete insisted on champagne toasts, Mrs. Henderson cried happy tears and immediately started planning the wedding. And at least 3 people mentioned that Rose would have been thrilled, but the moment Charlotte would treasure most came later. After the last guest had gone home and she and Jack were sitting on the porch, looking out over their farm, their land, their business, their life together. "Any regrets?" Jack asked, his arm around her shoulders. Charlotte thought about her old life, about the corporate ladder she'd walked away from, about the apartment she'd never missed and the job she'd never looked back on. "None," she said firmly. "Best decision I ever made." "Which one? Staying here or saying yes to me?" "Both," Charlotte said. "But if I'm being honest, they were really the same decision." Jack kissed the top of her head. "I can't wait to marry you." "I can't wait to marry you either," Charlotte said. "When should we do it?" "Next Christmas Eve?" Jack suggested 1 year from tonight. Charlotte looked out over the farm, at the Christmas trees that sparkled with lights, at the buildings they'd expanded and improved, at the community they'd built together. She imagined their wedding here, surrounded by the people who'd become their family, celebrating their love in the place where they'd found each other. "Perfect," she said. "Absolutely perfect." As they sat together in the cold December air, Charlotte reflected on the journey that had brought her here. A year ago, she'd been a successful but restless marketing executive who'd inherited a Christmas tree farm she'd planned to sell. Now she was an engaged small business owner who'd found her purpose in preserving traditions and creating joy for others. She'd traded a corner office for a farmhouse office, designer suits for flannel shirts and work boots, orderly reports for seasonal rhythms. She'd given up a 6-figure salary for variable income, predictable success for uncertain adventures, urban anonymity for small-town community, and it had been the best trade of her life. "What are you thinking about?" Jack asked. "Just grateful," Charlotte said, "for all of it. For the farm, for the community, for Tom and Pete and Mrs. Henderson, and everyone who made me feel welcome. For you, most of all. For me, for believing in me even when I didn't believe in myself," Charlotte said. "For challenging me to be braver. For showing me what it means to build something that matters." "You did that all on your own," Jack said. "I just provided the Christmas trees." Charlotte laughed. "Don't forget the alpacas." "Right, the alpacas," Jack agreed. "Speaking of which, we should probably check on them before bed." They made their rounds together, turning off lights and securing buildings, checking on the animals and making sure everything was ready for Christmas Day. It was a routine they'd developed over the past year, a domestic rhythm that felt as natural as breathing. As they walked back to the farmhouse, Charlotte looked up at the stars that were visible in the clear Vermont sky, something she'd never been able to see from her Manhattan apartment. The sight never got old, this reminder of how much bigger the world was than the narrow slice of it she'd known before. "Jack?" she said as they reached the porch. Thank you." "For what?" "For catching me when I fell," Charlotte said, "in the snow that first day, but also in every way that mattered." Jack stopped walking and turned to face her, his hands cupping her face gently. "Charlotte, you didn't fall. You flew. You soared into this life and made it better in every possible way." When he kissed her, Charlotte tasted their future. Wedding cake and Christmas cookies, spring planting and summer festivals, autumn harvests and winter celebrations. She tasted partnership and passion, challenge and comfort, love that would grow stronger with each passing season. Above them, the stars twinkled like Christmas lights, and Charlotte knew that she was exactly where she belonged. She'd found her home, her purpose, her person. She'd found her happily ever after in the most unlikely place, a Christmas tree farm in Vermont, in the arms of a man who'd taught her that the best dreams weren't the ones you planned, but the ones you were brave enough to live. Tomorrow was Christmas Day, the first of many they'd share as an engaged couple. Next year, they'd be married, officially partners in every sense of the word. There would be challenges ahead, there always were, but Charlotte faced them without fear. Whatever came, they'd handle it together. As they walked into the farmhouse hand in hand, Charlotte caught a glimpse of their reflection in the window, a woman and a man, both glowing with happiness, both ready for whatever adventures lay ahead. It was the perfect ending to their story, except it wasn't an ending at all. It was just the beginning. And so our story comes to a gentle close, dear listeners, with Charlotte and Jack safe and warm in their farmhouse, Surrounded by the quiet beauty of their Christmas tree farm, the snow continues to fall softly outside their windows, blanketing the rows of evergreens in pristine white. The Christmas lights twinkle like stars among the branches, casting a peaceful glow across the winter landscape. In the distance, you can almost hear the soft whisper of wind through the pine boughs, the gentle creak of snow-laden branches, and the comfortable silence of a world at rest. The farmhouse glows with warmth and love, its windows like welcoming beacons in the peaceful Vermont night. Tonight, Charlotte sleeps peacefully in her grandmother's house, no longer a stranger to this magical place, but truly home at last. Jack rests beside her, his heart full of gratitude for the unexpected gift that changed both their lives. Around them, the community that welcomed Charlotte with open arms sleeps soundly, dreaming of the Christmas celebrations to come. The Christmas trees stand sentinel in their neat rows, patient guardians of dreams and traditions, holding within their branches the promise of countless Christmas mornings yet to come. Families will walk these paths, children will run between these trees, and love will continue to grow in this enchanted place where hearts find their home. As you drift off to sleep tonight, dear listeners, carry with you the gentle magic of evergreen acres. Let yourself rest in the peace of falling snow, the comfort of warm fireplaces, and the joy of love that blooms even in the coldest winter. May your dreams be filled with twinkling lights, pine-scented breezes, and the quiet happiness that comes from finding exactly where you belong. Sleep well, and may your Christmas dreams be merry and bright. Sweet dreams.